big talking points of Miraculous Ladybug has always revolved around Marinette. I think that if you took the internet at face value, that Marinette would have to be the least popular character in the entire show, right? From the very beginning, she's copped hate for one reason or another, and I will admit that I've made a lot of videos talking about that in the past. I think for a lot of people, the reasons were actually largely meta though, and not always to do with their actual actions in the show. For instance, she was rather famously a massive creeper back in the day in regards to her interactions with Adrian, and whilst in the very early seasons it was funny, it eventually got really weird, and yet was clearly being positioned by the narrative to be funny and for you to laugh at her. For me personally, this was probably my biggest gripe, and credit where credit's due, season 6 outside of one or two instances has seen them dial back on a lot of the weirdness, and when it does re-emerge, the characters involved acknowledge that she's kinda weird. Of course, there were other reasons she was disliked beyond just the creepiness that would dominate the discourse of the online fanbase, such as people thinking she was a hypocrite with the whole Chloe situation and not giving her the miraculous anymore, which set her down the road of villainy, or there was a lot of chatter about how it had become the Marinette show almost exclusively, and Adrian was being increasingly sidelined. I pretty much figured that we would never be leaving those discussion points in the past, as they really did come around again and again over the years. However, now with the release of season 6, there's one topic surrounding Marinette's character that's dominating fandom spaces more and more as time goes by, and I think it's the big story point of the season, both from an in-show narrative point of view, and from a fandom discussion point of view. That is of course the question, as to whether Marinette is right to have concealed the truth about Gabe's true identity as Monarch from Adrian, and how much blame she deserves to have leveled at her for this. I suppose we'd just better start by giving the rundown and setting the scene of the story. This all starts at the end of season 5 when Gabe makes his big move to try to get his hands on the miraculous once and for all before he runs out of time and crumbles to dust, because Cat Noir had accidentally hit him with the cataclysm in the opening episode of the season, and they didn't have a lucky charm or something like that to fix things at the time. Of course, now that I'm thinking about that, does the logic of not being able to reverse the damage of the attack even hold up at all? Maybe that's a video for another time, because we're talking about Marinette today. Anyway, he made his move to try to get the miraculouses, and since Adrian was in the midst of a mental breakdown, Plague took the ring of the cat to Marinette, who had already been fighting Gabe's goons at the mansion, and she powered up into Bug Noir, and in the course of the battle, Gabe takes the miraculouses, he gets his wish, and he has a change of heart. He chooses to die, bringing Natalie back to life instead, whilst getting Marinette to promise that she would never say anything about this to Adrian, that she would keep the secret forever, and let Adrian keep some good memories about him. In the London special, we see that she decides to keep that secret, not just to protect Adrian's feelings, but also to ensure that Natalie doesn't go to prison, which would mean at least somebody that Adrian knows is going to be there for him going forward. After all, becoming completely orphaned over the course of a year is no small thing. A couple of characters, Natalie included, tell her that it's probably not the best idea, but she goes on with the facade regardless, which leads us into season 6. There's been a number of episodes that have dealt with the guilt that Marinette's feeling over having kept this secret, and the regret she holds about going along with this for so long. We have characters showing overt disapproval for her lies when they find out about them, and then we have Adrian slowly starting to put the pieces together about his dad, and what the hell's going on here, because he simply cannot gel with the idea that his dad was such a good guy, but he treated him for shit for so long. At some point over the course of either this season or next, although the amount they're leading on the story point this season makes me think it's going to happen at the end of season 6, we will see Adrian find out the truth, and there's going to be chaos in the team at the very least, and some pretty severe consequences no doubt. But even that's not really what we're here to talk about. We want to know the answer to the questions that were posed, right? Was Marinette right to have concealed the truth from Adrian, and how much blame does she deserve? Okay, so for the very bare bones answer to that first part of the question, I think we need to give a very simple answer. No, she was not right to lie to Adrian, and she should have told him the truth of what was going on. I think the season itself makes that very clear again and again, that Marinette, when she had the initial chance to tell him, should have told him the truth about who his father was and what was going on. From a basic moral standpoint, this is just very obvious. Adrian deserves to know about the death of his father and the events that led him to his grave. Pretty much every episode that deals with this topic slaps you in the face with this information. When Alia briefly finds out the truth, she gets super cold to Marinette in a way that we've never seen before from her, until Cat Noir wipes her memories at her request. When Luca found out the truth, he freaked out and demanded that she hand over the Ladybug Miraculous for some reason, until she turned back time and he forgot all about it. Kagami urged Marinette to tell the truth, as did Natalie before she had her change of heart. Meanwhile, Adrian keeps openly struggling with his father's memory and how the world knows Gabe as some great hero, whereas to Adrian, he wasn't a good man at all. He wonders what caused the change in him to go from a doting father who'd make Adrian toys and spend lots of time with him, to eventually becoming cold and distant, ignoring him and, from his perspective, his mother as well. He then went to outright abusing this boy after his mum died, briefly faked a return to being a good dad, only to go even harder than before and locked him in a prison cell before promptly dying. Adrian confides in Marinette about all of this stuff, and she just has to awkwardly sit there. It's gotten to the point that the boy had to seek therapy to try to come to grips with the difference in how he perceives his dad versus how everybody else perceives his dad. And so it's clear that it's having a pretty immense negative impact on his overall mental health. Thus, the very obvious answer to the question is therefore, yes, she was wrong to not tell this dude, and every time she fumbles telling him across season 6, working up the courage to do so before chickening out is a massive fumble as well. I really don't see how you could even argue the opposite point, although I will take a look at 2 potential devil's advocate positions now just to try to put some of them to rest early on. The first of these positions would be that she did it for his own good, and that by hiding things he's able to have the loving support of Natalie as an adopted mother. If Marinette had told the truth, then Natalie would have found herself being sent to prison. Okay, so in response to that, I'd have to say that Adrian being told the truth is in no way going to mean that you have to turn Natalie into the authorities, and it would also ensure that Adrian has all the facts about who is quite literally raising him. He turns down the opportunity to live with either set of his grandparents in order to stay with Natalie, but surely he deserves to know all the information before he makes that sort of choice. And like I said, you don't have to call the cops on her. They are under no real obligation to do that, because whilst Natalie is honestly a terrible person who ruined a lot of lives, at least she had the decency to be remorseful and look out for Adrian's best interests. Meanwhile, Ivan's dad was unrepentant even after a long-term prison stay, a prison stay that seemingly made him miss out on most of his son's life, I'll add, before he then tries to force Ivan to become a criminal and by doing so try to ruin his life, because stealing the Mona Lisa is a big deal, no matter how old you are. Also, just a side note, but I thought that the really simplistic plan that this guy came up with to steal the Mona Lisa was so ridiculous that it could never ever happen, and it broke my suspension of disbelief in the episode. I mean, how the hell could a very simple costume change allow you to sneak into one of the biggest cultural centers on the planet and make away with near priceless artifacts? In light of the events of this year, I have to say that I owe Miraculous an apology for that one, because apparently it's far easier than I ever would have expected overall.
Actually, it's gonna be super easy, barely an inconvenience.
But yes, this dude is quite literally guilty of an actual crime, actively tried to rope his son into it and showed no remorse at all, but Ladybug and the gang actively lied to the cops about him being guilty of a crime because he was. Criminal conspiracy. I'm pretty sure that's a thing you can actually get arrested for, so I don't think you can really say that Natalie would have been dragged off to prison. Adrian would be mad, sure, but I doubt he's going to handle a life sentence either. So let's put that one to rest as a non-issue, but there's still another potential devil's advocate position. Couldn't Adrian be akumatized if he found out the truth, especially since he'd think that he was the reason that his dad died because of Cataclysm? Well, for starters, the Cataclysm thing, that's a meta issue. It's not something Marinette would know because she doesn't know he's Cat Noir. However, with the whole thing about not wanting him to be akumatized, if she told him right when she first found out, which she should have, this would be a non-issue because Lila wasn't active as the butterfly user at that point in time. She waited a couple of hours, I think, to properly enact her plan, which didn't even involve akumatizing somebody else to begin with, because she didn't need to. Thus, Adrian would be a-okay. Plus, from a meta perspective, she hadn't even given him back the ring at that stage of the story, so even if he did freak out and Lila managed to shoot off an Akuma, it wouldn't be as impactful. Also, he was in London when he found out, which gives him a little bit of time to cool off before he's back in the strike zone, and she also waited until the end of the summer holidays to akumatize anybody for the first time. On top of that, I just think it's not a very good excuse to begin with, right? Yeah, he could be akumatized. So what? He still deserves to know. Okay, so we've answered the first part of the question, but what about part 2? Because a lot of discussion I've seen has really been going hard on condemning Marinette for not telling Adrian the truth at the time or since, and whilst yes, she has made a mistake and she's going to face some consequences for that going forward, at the same time, I do think she deserves a bit of grace. I think Adrian would have the right to be angry with her and would probably lash out at Ladybug because I doubt they're going to do 2 big reveals at the same time, and I can see them wanting to have Adrian on good terms with Marinette and bad terms with Ladybug as a sort of reverse love square, you know? However, whilst Adrian has the right to be angry, I don't think it makes her some terrible person either, like a lot of people are parroting these days. Let's just recap, right? Marinette spends much of her early life being bullied at school by Chloe, and having witnessed some of that bullying in an episode flashback, it is actually pretty horrific. It gets to the point that Marinette hardly even wants to go to school at all, and peaks with her being humiliated by Chloe, Sabrina, and Kim, who she had a crush on at the time, and which clearly breaks her brain as it makes her feel like she has to obsessively study boys that she likes to ensure they aren't that same kind of guy. This is only a bit before the Origins episode too, right? Origins is the first day at school for the new year, and the flashback is in the last week of the previous school year. So she goes from a helpless bullying victim to entrusted with superhero powers in a couple of months, and from then on she has to fight against numerous different supervillains, while seeing multiple people die only for her powers to bring them back, again and again and again. She knows there's some deranged supervillain out there who doesn't care who he hurts as long as he gets his wish, and fairly soon her only help, her mentor, goes and loses his memory, passing all of the other powers to her. Congratulations, Marinette, you're the captain now. She's 13 for much of the early stuff, and then she turns 14, by the way, and has stayed that way ever since. Her life revolves around fighting villains and being the only thing standing between Paris and destruction. She has all the weight of responsibility on her as a guardian, with Fu gone and Su-han being extremely incompetent. She gets with the boy that she's liked for ages, only for his dad to rip him away from her and send him to London forever, for it then to be revealed that said dad is actually the horrible supervillain she's been fighting. In the course of their battle, he kills himself, but not before asking her to promise to not tell Adrian the truth. She is 14 years old. So she listens and doesn't tell Adrian the truth because she thinks that is what's best for his mental state, but it's not like she's some dictator. She doesn't force anybody to go along with this. Kagami knows and says nothing. Hell, Felix is his cousin and was once one of Adrian's only friends, and yet he says nothing too, and doesn't even tell him about the Senti child stuff. However, they are also just 14, and having been 14, everything often feels so hard and life and death. For me, that was very mundane stuff that could feel like the end of the world, but for Marinette, it literally is life and death and world-ending stuff that she's trying to protect the person she loves from. When she does work up the courage to try to tell Adrian, she has the choice to show him a letter from his dad, where he goes full Green Goblin, demanding that Adrian continue his work and avenge him while showing no real remorse for anything. I too would have chucked that letter into a shredder and moved on. From then on, whenever she wavers, it feels like Natalie drags her back into the lie. For me, this is the person who deserves pretty much all of the hate here. Natalie originally was keen to tell the truth, but it was Marinette that talked her out of it. However, once again, Marinette is 14 and Natalie's what, in her 30s, and attempting to claim guardianship of this boy who she apparently loves like a son? Surely she should be old enough to know that no, we have to tell him the truth, right? Then later on, when Marinette starts to get some distance from the lie and is cracking under the pressure, Natalie bullies her into keeping up pretenses for her own agenda. Even if this is some convoluted plan where she wants to double-cross the kingdom, she should be telling Adrian the truth and not intimidating a 14-year-old. In the end, for me, I think it's that a lot of people have a really unreliable internal narration and memory of what they were like at age 14, and thus they have a skewed perception on how much a 14-year-old should be able to cope with. The fact that Marinette has not had some sort of mental breakdown by this point is already pretty amazing. And yes, she has made a mistake here. It's a very big one, and it is destined to blow up in her face if you watch the episodes. But I also think it's a very uncharitable interpretation of the story to simply say, oh, she's a bad person for this reason, yada yada yada. It's actually a very difficult situation because, of course, there is a right answer for what she should have done, but that's without taking into account the mental burden she's carrying, and that she's developed into a person who thinks she has to do it all, and that she also just loves Adrian and doesn't want to hurt him. Who the hell wants to have to tell their boyfriend that their dad was actually a horrendous terrorist willing to target anybody, including babies? So I really think we do have to settle down. She isn't Satan, she's just a 14-year-old girl who screwed up and is now being manipulated by an adult that she trusts. Of course, with all that being said, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about what we've discussed today? Did you agree with my conclusion, or do you have the opposite view? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.